It's my great pleasure to introduce with us today Mr. Ramesh Abhishek, the Secretary, DIPP, along with his colleague, the Joint Secretary, Mr. Rajiv Aggarwal, and the Director General of the World Intellectual Property Organization, Mr. Francis Gurry, and WIPO Assistant Director General and Chief of Staff, Mr. Naresh Prasad. We'll do a couple of minutes opening remarks from the Secretary and the Director General, and then we'll open it up to questions and answers. Thank you very much. Sir.
Thank you, and on behalf of the Government of India, it's indeed an honor and privilege to welcome the Honorable Director General of the World Intellectual Property Organization, Mr. Francis Gurry, the ADG and the Chief of Staff, Mr. Naresh Prasad, the Secretary, DIPP, Mr. Ramesh Abhishek, who is well known to all the press personnel out here. I would also like to take this opportunity to welcome all our friends from the press, from the media, print, electronic media. As you're aware, this year's WIPO conference on the GDCM, the Global Digital Content Market, is the second of its, the second edition. The first one was in Geneva in 2016. And we are indeed honored and privileged that WIPO has taken India as its partner to host the second edition. We hope, given India's strengths in terms of digital India, in terms of the drive for digital payments and the innovative India, creative India slogan from the national IPR policy, we certainly hope that this conference will be the harbinger of the way ahead as we move in digitizing our economy and taking ahead the entire paradigm. Without further ado, I would like to request the Director General of WIPO to give his opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Aggarwal, dear Rajiv. Mr. Secretary Ramesh Abhishek, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's really a great pleasure to be in India, and it's a great pleasure to be in India for this conference. Why are we holding it? Well, look, as we sit here and look at you, I think that's the answer. You're all involved in content production. All involved in content production, which immediately is going to be put, of course, to some extent in print, but to a large extent it's going to become electronic in one way or another. And that applies, of course, to everything that relates to the publication industry. It applies to everything that relates to the music industry. It applies to everything that relates to the audiovisual industry, the film industry, and it applies to everything that relates to the video game industry, which, by the way, is larger than each of the audiovisual and the music industries. So content is, of course, the thing that we all, the reason for which we have this extraordinary infrastructure for transmitting information and data. In the 19th century, Henry Thoreau, who was an American writer, said, they're building a telegraph from Maine to Texas, but it may be that Maine and Texas have nothing to say to each other. And that's an illustration that, it's one thing having the infrastructure, but it's what you produce, the content, which is really king, as they say. Now, in that area, of course, there has been extraordinary disruption in the course of the last 20 years, in particular in relation to the production, but to a greater extent, the distribution and the consumption of content. And this conference explores the dimensions of that disruption and what that disruption has done to the balances that we all cherish in terms of ensuring that creators, writers, composers, performers receive a just reward from the utilization on this extraordinary network of their content. And that's very much a fluid and dynamic situation, and it's really this which we wish to explore in this conference with some of the leading artists and personalities involved in media in the Asian region, and of course in a country which has the largest film industry in the world, an extraordinary music industry, extraordinary publication and media industry. So in a place which is really the natural place for us to hold this conference. So we very much look forward to the conference and to the dialogue with you all this morning. Thank you.
Very good afternoon. Director General, Mr. Francis Gurry, ADG, Mr. Naresh Prasad, my colleague Rajiv Aggarwal, friends from the media, ladies and gentlemen. My department has great pleasure in hosting this conference on global digital content market. This, as you have already heard, is a very important event. We are already leaders in many of the aspects of content. You have already heard film industry, music industry, media, and there are many surveys and reports that these are going to grow quite phenomenally in the next few years. We need to deliberate on the challenges this digitization has thrown in. We need to look at the enormous opportunities that are coming our way. I think it's one of the most important areas for our country. We also need to see how our intellectual property rights laws are better enforced to stop any violations. In the last 3 or 4 years, we have made many strides. We have taken many initiatives to enforce a good IPR policy regime. We have tried to streamline our IPR administration. We have also done a lot of training of police and judiciary and so on for better enforcement. But this is all work in progress. We have to protect our intellectual properties just the way we protect other physical properties. We are very conscious of it. And I think this conference is going to bring together a lot of CEOs, artists, and many other people from India and around the world. And we are sure there is going to be a very vibrant and very useful discussion, facilitated, of course, by WIPO themselves, about the great opportunities and what all we need to do. We are all looking forward with a lot of expectations on the deliberations and outcome of this conference. And we are very happy to host it, and we are very grateful to World Intellectual Property Organization and Director General Mr. Gurry especially for giving us this opportunity to host it. Asia Pacific region is the focus of this conference, and with so many economic opportunities coming up in this area and in India, of course, we are really looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. We're open for questions. Can you please identify yourself before asking the question?
Mr. Gurry, with this huge influx of digital content in India, and we've got a huge focus on Digital India, Startup India here by the government, what are the challenges this throws up in the years to come from an IPR perspective and a compliance perspective?
Thank you very much. Look, I think there are opportunities and there are challenges. So you've drawn attention to some of the opportunities, and I wouldn't underestimate, we've both spoken about it this morning, the Secretary and I, how important the opportunities are, challenges. Well, I think at its broadest, there's the whole challenge of adapting the architecture of the analog world to the digital world. And that's quite significant, and it involves extensive disruption at all levels. And we've seen that disruption, in particular, I would say, in the distribution function worldwide. So bookshops, record shops, DVD shops have all been replaced, really, or in the process of being replaced, by digital platforms. And the nature of the digital platforms is usually that they're global. So the distribution has gone, of course, from physical to digital, but it's also gone from local to global. Creates opportunities, creates challenges and problems. What are, some of the matters that need to be addressed from an intellectual property point of view? Well, I think there are many, but some of them, just to mention some of them, are how to ensure that the creators and the artists, who really are at the base of the richness of our culture, continue to be protected. So are they better protected? Are they better remunerated in the digital platform world than in the individual physical book-by-book sale world? These are questions which I think are still unresolved, and that's part of the reason for holding the conference. So that's one set of issues that revolve around the creators, I think, and their relationship with the platforms and their relationship with the producing entities in all media. I think another set of issues really is that what we have seen, taking music as an example, in the course, I think, of the last 20 years, is quite an interesting story. We've seen a story where music, in the music industry, was somewhat resistant to the digital world in the origins of the music industry. And we see, and we saw the contraction of the music industry over time, worldwide. And then in the last 2 years or so, 2 or 3 years, we've seen for the first time the expansion of the global music industry once again. And why? Because of new business models, essentially. Because of streaming and subscription models, which make available content on accessible terms. And I think there is a lesson in that, and that is that making available content on reasonable and accessible terms encourages compliance. And we see digital sales rising. Now, there's no doubt that piracy is a massive threat to the creative industries in the digital environment. But we have to, I think, be intelligent about the way in which we address piracy and recognize that business and business models have a part to play there also. By making available content on accessible terms, it helps compliance.
Thank you. Any more questions?
Yes. Mr. Gurry, I am from News 7 Tamil journalist, News 7 Tamil. Do you tell me about how much is in India is the developed in the sector in the IPO? In Americans always tell that India is not developed. Would you tell me about India is how much is taking the serious about this?
So look, it's really not for me to comment on India so much as for Secretary Abhishek, but please allow me to just respond to your question briefly before the Secretary says anything. India has made extraordinary efforts, in particular in the recent years. Really extraordinary efforts, which I think we see in the intellectual property world in a number of different dimensions. Well, first, India has become, if I may say, more integrated with the international system. So it's joined a number of international systems, the trademark system, for example. It's become an international authority under the patent system. So there are a number of measures it's taken to integrate more with the international system. We've seen a great effort put into the infrastructure of intellectual property offices in India, extraordinary reduction in processing times, and this is very helpful for, as they say, the ease of doing business, but the Secretary can talk about that better than I. And I would just say the overall message is that India has made extremely important efforts in the field of intellectual property, and I'm sure that that will be helpful for India.
See, my second question, so you know that the Tamil industry, film industry it's a #1 industry in India. There will be many times, there will be any big heroes that produce the movie, there will see always the problem about the stories, who is the author of the stories. So recently one movie also is name called, it's a Sarkar, that means government. That means a huge controversy that who is the author to write. So what is your advice to this film industry, this always controversial in India? To give me some advice, what are the missing in the area in India, this industry?
Look, I think we struggle with that worldwide. It's an age-old problem. Who invented this first? Who created the story first? Now, there are various devices you can use, you know. Traditionally, in the analog world, people used lawyers or notaries to say, here, they deposited a copy, and that's proof of the existence of the work at a certain point in time. And there are digital versions of this, which are now services that are now available. So that's a significant problem, I think, that we've always faced. I think that it underlines the importance for creators to make sure that they have a protection of their work, which is recorded, because the internet makes works much more vulnerable to appropriation by others.
If I can also add, as you know, the copyrights are all they're private rights, which have to be enforced through a court of law. See, so far as the government is concerned, we have put in place a robust legislative mechanism, and these rights have to be enforced by private individuals only. But let me thank you for asking this question. I didn't want to inflict on you some of this information that I should have. See, we just acceded to the WIPO Copyright Treaty and the WIPO Performances and Phonograms Treaty that will increase the coverage of protection of copyrights in the international IP regime. It is now extended to even internet and digital environment. We have just done that. This action also brings the Indian creative industry under an international copyright system which has secured the distribution of their work, provided them with a level playing field, and infused a sense of confidence in them and their creative development. I may also point out that in the Global Innovation Index, India has jumped up 24 ranks in the last 3 years. We were 81, now we are 57. And India is the top ranked economy in Central and Southern Asia and has now outperformed on innovation relative to its GDP per capita for 7 years in a row. I may also add that in the World Bank Doing Business report, India has jumped up 53 ranks in 2 years and 65 ranks in 4 years. That all shows the efforts which are going into this. See, enforcement of Ipr laws, I mentioned briefly, is an extremely important matter. See, we have worked with various states and the police organizations, and we have conducted 33 enforcement training programs, and we have also seen some impact of that in the field by way of better enforcement. This has been done in 9 states, and similar trainings have also been given to customs officials and the judiciary. Another fruitful collaboration that we have done, government has done to combat online piracy, is the removal of infringing or rogue websites on the basis of incomplete WHOIS credentials in association with the National Internet Exchange of India, NIXI. Until date, 80 such rogue websites have been pulled down. We have also done an anti-piracy video campaign, which was launched by the government in association with the Film and Television Producers Guild of India, featuring videos from eminent silver screen personalities, and there have been other initiatives as well.
Thank you.
So, if I may ask a question about the conference itself. So over the next two days, what are going to be the main deliberations in this conference, and what outcomes are you expecting at the end of it?
Hello. Yep. Look, first of all, it's not a decision-making conference. I think we're in the process of exploring still and trying to formulate the right questions. Of course, it's an extremely fast-moving world. So we've spoken a little this morning about the revolution or the tumultuous change and disruption in respect of distribution. But I think we'll see that in the future in respect of production. So it will not be long before artificial intelligence generated music is a regular feature. So we'll see great disruption not only in distribution, which we've seen now, and consumption, the way in which we consume things like music or audiovisual works is completely different from how it used to be. But we'll see it in the case of production as well. So there are many, many questions out there, and at the same time, all of this is moving to global platforms. And I think that poses strategic questions for any government. How do they encourage the development of global platforms? You know, the internet giants are relatively few in this world, and they're concentrated mainly in 2 countries. What does this mean in terms of policy and how you approach it from a policy point of view for all governments? Because we'll be taking a regional approach. What's it mean for individual performers? You know, at the other end of the spectrum, how do they fit into this world, and what is all this change doing to them? And what's it mean for the intermediaries also are involved, the different platforms? So I think we need to ask the right questions, and that will come through sharing experience and information, and then see whether, you know, the action to be taken is regulatory. It's not sure that that's the case, or, you know, business action. These are all, I think, open questions, and we don't purport to have any, you know, simple answers. I think there are some directions that we can see.